Namo Guru Be Namo Buddhaya Namo Dharmaya Namo Sthaya Namo Guru Be Namo Buddhaya Namo Dharmaya Namo Sanghaya Namo Guru Be Namo Buddhaya Namo Dharmaya Namo Sanghaya Kanden Haye Guen Yin Do Gane Ra Gai Sho Sa Bon De Chon Zhen Zhe Che Yin Ya Wu Guen Yin Lo San Zha Se Da Che Ba Nian De She So So De Ye Na Ka Se De Ben De De Che Zhe La Ma Ye Ben Zong Ga She Ta Lo De Be Se Ya Na Xin Zhou Su De Ba Ye Zhe Ge Ya Shu Su Xie Jie Chun Gu Jia Wei Lu Zhi Tu Ye San Na Wei Ye Ju Li Xie Song Cha Bi Bi Ye La Me Zhe Bi Gu To De Zhen Bi Dui De La Cha Ye Wu Zhi Yun Na Zuo Me Do Yan Dang Tie Xin Do Bi Na Zi Ti Jia So Shan Yi Zhi Che Din Ya Zo Di Se Ya Na Xin Che La Che Ba Yan Bi Ka Xi To Me De Ne Sa Ba Yi Lu Ma Yi Yi Mi Ge Xi Ji Dang Qie Ba Ran Dong Ba So Ye Mi De Nian Ne Jue Ba Ta Bi So So Xia Nian Me De De Ma De Zhu La Zhe Che Ye Ba Be De Zhou De Ye Che Guo Yan Bu Ju Ye La Zhen Zhen Ba Ta Ye Zha San Ba ta be yi ra ngo che zhe la mo ta ba che na ye che gu ka la天这呢，这达拉桑别，这些萨耶这耶，查哇阿巴多娑，那么达维塞。耶勒仙巴耶，所着果拉，查多米阿央，他们那我说过拉巴。谢的巴多，没有的巴说，大所见念，三别给我，太阳当着我，给了康平。天不拉切子，罗呀桑查巴耶，天别念波，人多萨杰说，灭灭在为，得了见日塞。天没见别，王不讲别，天也不马路，人在上边的，看见开别，左眼中看吧。罗呀桑人茶别，下呀拉说瓦呀的，没呀没在为，得见人，得没见别，王不讲别样。天不马路，人在上边的，看见开别，左眼中看，罗上茶别，下拉说瓦的。没有没有在为，得了见日是，天也没有见别，王不讲别样，天有不马路，人在上为。高见开别，左见中看怕，罗上茶别，下有拉说瓦的，八点早别，来马人不接。大所见我了，别人的说了，大的前边，国内接送，国送多也，我愿着在多说。八点早为， la ma re bo je da so ni ga pe me de sho la ka de che be ko ne che cho dan te mo wen do ze do so pa de sa ve la ma re bo je da so ni ga ra pe me de shu ka de che be ko ne che so de cha jo ni be pa do yo ma sa ma je me che ra ba ro je ma je ma ga nam ge ngo ni so zo ra re ye che che ye de zo ya ve yo la cha ze lo de ya da ga de pa ra ga de pa ra sama bo de so ya de ya da ga de pa ra ga de pa ra sama ga de bo de so ya de ya da ga de pa ra ga de pa ra sama bo de so ya ge re dong da ya ju xie wa da mi de ne be jian dan te wa te wa zhuo xie be zong zong jiu ne da xie dian de le shou ya sa xie be ye jo xie me lo da ya re ra le je ye de ye ba de sa ye do me de wa ye do ya na ma da ye la che ma yo ye da gu ro ra da ma de lo ni ya na ya me so je cho nam la ja jo ba do da ne ja do je da ge ju ju je be cho nam je do lo san je do ma ra sho so je cho nam la ja jo ba do da ne ja do je da ge ju ju je be cho nam 多罗宾觉桑见诸波学道诸界说南来上就巴多多罗宾觉桑见诸波罗Let me remind all of ourselves to cultivate bodhicitta motivation, seeking complete enlightenment for the sake of all other kind mother sentient beings. And with that kind of at least contrived bodhicitta motivation, we should participate in this discourse. So we left in this commentary on the wisdom chapter of Bodhisattva Mahasattva Shantideva's Guide to Bodhisattva Way of Life, dealing with how Prasangikas, they uniquely or exclusively assert Shikpa, disintegration or disintegratedness as an entity. Tadabada join than the person again. Tadabada join became Zendi.
Ranja to that more said, because I over changing Jungle, more about doing Shagora. They were said over changing their Sawar Shagora. The Tada did to Maris Kuran Wusha Shagora.
Tadabada the Ranja to be
so. The Ranja Kuran to do the Tada and the zoo is. Tada tell it and the Shagora.
No, so the Pasanga, 텐주백이 다다바 랑제 투고 스고르게
라
텐주백을 다다바다 랑제 투고 스고르베
다다 이제 라자타와 소리지래다.
So Geshe read the paragraph 3 on page 187 and a little bit the next paragraph. So one of the unique assertions of Tengyuba Prasangikas is that Shikpa, disintegration or disintegratedness, is an entity because it was caused by something, as we talked about before. And so of the three times, past, present, and future, present is regarded as the primary, the main thing, because it is in relation to the present, past, what has already, ceased to exist, and what will, happen in the future. That's all but dependent on, right? Whereas the present is the kind of reference point, isn't it? And in relation to that, the past and future are asserted. So basically, Geshe has kind of re-explained the same thing here, that present is the reference point, if you will, considered as a main thing among the three times. When we use a sprout, nyugu, as an example, that a sprout has a moment or an aspect that has already disintegrated. But the sprout itself has not disintegrated completely. Aspect or a moment of a sprout has disintegrated already, so that's the past, isn't it? And then a moment or an aspect of the sprout has not yet arisen. It will. That's contingent upon the sprout. So that's what we call the future of the sprout. Whereas the sprout, it looks like as if it's not really dependent on almost anything here. Right? That's the sense.
Shimada Tenjo is do some over there some sonja. Do it then Mizude Shimen you go so over do some Joba Jobi you deva you could deva the mope. 누구 여벌 되라 주 순간 제접데 마시 뒤로기 주소 주주면서 시 제송라 천주와 그 누구서 제제라 주송송도 메제진 지유되는 미시바 소 체벌 여비에 주소유주 두무마이가 시비야 두무마이가 시들 매바이노스 근데 천주가 주소 두무마이가 시야 가르쳐 이 주소도 뭐바이 맞다 시야 두무마이 시와 말이 주소 뭐바이 베시라마에 캐는 거리스 다 천주 가르쳐 주소 뭐바사 되는 거죠 천주는 뭔가 쓰고 있잖아 봐 Shirama yuze kanga ngobo sega sigora.
Yuno go me chabro.
Oh, chi ngobo singo metaba ngobo sti metaba sigeza mara.
No, so.
Oh, disheza ko ngobo do chiwa de. China chimen doyada tenyuya ni kaga yaris tireda.
Ala chirama be lo ngobo la ni shi no na ngobo me chabsa dro.
Oh, da shi do ngobo ya sigeza.
No. So Geshe reread that third paragraph on page 187 and explained that Prasangikas assert past, present, and future as entities or movable. But that's not unique to Prasangikas' standpoint because Vaibhashikas, Chedamava also accept it. But there's a difference in terms of how they conceptualize or define what entity or movable means. For Prasangikas, an entity is that which has a functionality. It's a functional thing, right? Whereas for the Vaibhashikas, entity means anything that exists is an entity, right? So basically, Vaibhashikas says that all things that exist are entities. Whereas for Prasangikas, entity means a functional entities only. Right, so that's how Prasangikas assert that 3 times are functional entities and disintegratedness or disintegration is a functional entity.
What is it? Because Shime Yuguso, Mama Rere, two some Jobe, Yugu Deva, Yugu Mahobe, two so young. 누구 예번 내가 뒤에서가 뒤럽도 뒤쪽도 마시네 뒤로기 뒤에서 저도 뒤로 먼저 신주를 숨라 ten주로에 ten 누구서 레레라 뒤에서 손도 미세지 뒤에는 미세게 소지세 제가에 미세 뒤에서 저도 투모마이가 시 들모가 이노스 다 두준조도 투모마이가 샤지 직시하지 어때레스 그래서 레레라티 조지미라티 샤샤게 투모마이 두준고가 시바 잠라 에네디 투모마이 시마 시라마이 두준고가 시두와지 어디서가.
So basically Geshe kind of repeated his commentary on the paragraph on page 188, the second one, that although Vaibhashikas and Prasangikas both accept 3 times as entities, but what does the entity mean, entityness, then there is a big difference, right? Vaibhashikas say that anything that exists, existence itself is an entity, whereas Prasangikas says that only functional entities are entities. So when the Prasangikas say that the 3 times, in particular, disintegratedness is an entity. That's what that means. It's caused by something. It's a functional entity.
다음에는 인정거마다 언제부터 메데베 서바 봉주는 신앙지에서 라신의 제는 인제 공개하다 강을 고마서 매자 당연히 인정거마 제라 대개는 제부터 봐 통계지 강사 좀 토제 제부터 강사디 제부터 타봐 러시메게 당연히 대다 TV2 뉴아콜디 시발에 셰르게 대반데라네 침베타바 라중티랑 라중 랑라 제부 쇼디 주시 주시 투제진이 되게 땜바제 침베타바 라중다랑네 다 주네 Rabtung, Rabdi Shungene, Jibutam Jitaba, Churjang, Jibutaba, Chuchuban, Shagaran, Kana Sheshen, Jibukumi, Jibutaba, one the Jibutaba told you what? They must be sure to send them by Jiver Shendu, Luce, Teda Mother Show, George. She took a stomach. Tanya Jibutava, told about the need to soon be sick. You say you long last, Mother Janice, Yaku, Yara Kubashibu, Java Song Source. Cup, go, Dintawa, Dinteres, Shinde go be. Cup, go, Dinter, Doyle Long Germany, Tobe to Jinju, Nanji, Toba says Nishiki, Inji, Shinde go be, Shenny was. She thought I think the long time, Sanji long had to go away. It's true in a long time, Yamara. The song at around the Shagris or that. Go get the Josh. Casa Shoga around the Dashama, Ranji Music, or this story.
So Geshe read was on page 188 and stopped on top of page 189. And here the argumentation or debate is not really between Prasangikas and non-Buddhist schools of thought. It's really between Prasangikas and other Buddhist schools of thought, Savatantika, Madhyamika, and schools down below. One of the reasons is that because Prasangikas is citing Buddha's words here, right? You can't cite Buddha's words for a non-Buddhist. So that shows that the opponents are Buddhists as well, not a non-Buddhist school of thought.
Rigba Shida Shiva Ni Da Ranshimeva Temadang Ti Dakaya Ranshimeva Juba Tembos Tangboni Kanzaka Dami Tena Bebe Wamaya Suoni Namdu Rigba Tini De La Chishu Tumayeva Sumso Tia Dole Sudamai Da su da demba mai su da mi da su ni chi da bi xian de pong bo sao ma xi ga la ya xia de jie ba xi guo ne ji de ni xu nie bo dian la sa xi le xi pong bo le xi me ce la pong me de ti me Tijeba Pungdeme, Tijeba Koji, she's a Rabji Nanipada. Rabji Chiver Nangeri Vajeva Sum. Titana da su da Titana da Subunso Bungo Nadi Mutateva. Da Nanena Yangan Jurna. Chichi. Jigdani Georgia, dollars, short hill, Masum Bani, Pumboy, da Sheme, Shem, da Sheme, Shingava, Mudiba Mato Bal, Mujum, Mudiba Mato Mijuala, Mujum, Changava Mazunga. Sashi le sho ngaba sungba ne mudibe lokya gobe chi yin la tadu rangde nguma dang Ranjiva Kaji, Jongaji, Kaji, da several moves in Jobata. Young Kanzak, Terror, Gashi, Pumbu Tobata, Yevji Chever and Joba, Gobe Shade, Oman Juba, the Sosum Diamond Gobata. Yep Diamond Gobe, Rigbani, Namdu Jirikbatela, here and dollar. Daji Shaw Digis, Chene, Tawe, Chene, Tawara, Chubaye, Digi Bumbo did that day. Della Simji, should I not on she's not have a dollar, that Shingi, Joju General, Sumba, Tenny, Young Namdu Jirikbandi, so Zedo. What did that? The military rebel, Zod, the Karisna. Namdi Ribati, Amarika, Sudama, so damage, number Dunzia, the river Zodo, or the much work of the Shasha.
So Geshe basically read page 189 and half of the page 190, the top part. So the subpoint 2 captioned as a presentation of specific arguments that refute the self of persons. So this is done in 2 ways, showing the self to be without intrinsic nature and establishing that the intrinsic nature of mind does not exist either through this. So here we are dealing with establishing selflessness of a person or refuting the self of a person, the self meaning intrinsic self of a person, as well as intrinsic sense of a mind, right? That's a self, that's I and mind, or self and mind. So as Geshe said, there are many reasons, right, that could be used to establish selflessness of a person, but among many reasons, what is called the Namnyung Rigpa, sevenfold reasoning or sevenfold analysis and reasoning is regarded as the preferred or the as the maybe I would say best reason to establish the selflessness of a person.
That Namdi was he was then he begged go down to Tambo Juba, the King that I sent him, my name. Yelama met at the debate of image. She sing that wrong, Yelada. Ranching go check my taking wrong Yela down. Ranching Tadi my Yela nam down. Who needs the environment? I did this already. Sing that number do you right? You not so far and so this is take a sing that sound somebody. She not did it work. Rajesh when consulted them Maris this or she said this or music minds. You know, Rajesh was your mind. Rajesh to be tidy, my Rajesh to be minds. Those guys never do say Yakago, she had Namdi was. Sing the bed because sing that the Koran color there Muju that give Hung to the Gangas, Rekan sing the red over. What did the Jani?
So there is a citation from Introduction to the Middle Way in the middle page 190, which reads, like a chariot, it's not different from its parts, nor is it the same. It does not possess them. The chariot is not in its parts, nor are its parts in the chariot. It's not the mere collection, nor is it the shape. So that kind of spells out what we call the 7 ways in which sevenfold analysis of reasoning, right? And an example used here is Shingda, chariot drawn by the horses. And as Geshe explained, that when we look at a chariot, right, the wheel, let's say, right, it has many different parts. It has the hub, it has the rim, it has the spoke, all of those things, but all of them are interlinked, isn't it? Dependent on something. Nothing is intrinsically existent. And so therefore, the idea here is there is no intrinsic chariot, intrinsically existent chariot. If there were to be, then it would have to be either identical with all of its parts, right? Or it would have to be, something distinctively existent apart from the parts. But when we look in those two ways, right, we couldn't find, an intrinsic a chariot in that sense, right? And then we look into all these different parts, sevenfold. This is called sevenfold analysis of reasoning.
남주세 남바준들이 와제 가자 신다들 죽발에 신다랑이 신부들이 일하려는데 신다랑 일하 찍지 찍 다들 되면 찍지 근데 랑이 뭐 찍봐서 뭐 찍봐서 랑이 주변 뭐 찍봐 찍지 근데 랑이 일하 남다 정신이 타대시 지다 신다다 신다다 연락이 타대들이 유튜브 타대 말아 어디 찍시 되네 이 연락 남다 뭐니지 덴바 많이 신다 연락다 내고 지나서 유튜브에 있는 뭐이 덴바 말이 찍시 이 연락 남라 이 연락 남라 파르무니기 때마마이 뱀뱀에 주인이서 신다 연락 때마다 연락 신다 때마 쇼컬 때마다 거기 뭐 때마다 이제 편집 때문에 주인이서 신다 연락 때마다 연락 신다 때마다 니 나신여 말이 찍시 다 연락은 들라 서로 무니기 때마 많이 찍시 다 연락은 두바자면 디마이 디마이 연락 디바스 주루샤와 연락 디바스는 신대 연락가가 신다 마주고 있는 연락가가 대 시불신 하셔는 그 뒤에도 디바스 그래서 연락은 디바자면 디마이 연락은 예주 거에 제봐야 많이 신가 많이 넣어서 이제 다른 나머 뉴스야 되다. 편집 때문에 때문에 주니시 덴바시 예시 아니 가자 직타되니 어디 거기 뉴스거든.
So based on that citation from Supplement to the Middle Way, Madhyamika Avatar in the middle of page 190, I just read to you. So we use a chariot as an example, to refute intrinsically existent a chariot or intrinsicness to to the chariot itself. And the seven parts are kind of presented this way. That first, we said hypothetically speaking, if there were to be an intrinsically existent chariot, right? That's the primary assumption, Then we said it could exist in only one of the two ways, right? It would have to exist as being identical with all of its parts, right? There's just one, a single existence, or that it would have to exist as being distinctively different from its parts, right? These are the two ways, So that's already two. So we said when you look at the from the what called the Ngovo, its identity point of view, that there is no intrinsically existent chariot that is identical or just the same as its parts, right? That's one. Okay? And there is no intrinsically existent chariot that exists as being distinctive, right, different from its parts, right? So oneness and difference, right? That's two we have. And then, this is really hard to translate to English because it's not eloquent, but doesn't matter. Because in the Sanskrit Tibetan language, we talk about, a possessor and what is possessed, right? Possessor and, so Dharma means a chariot, the wheel itself is like the whole thing. That's like a possessor, and it possesses all its parts, right? And so if you look at that sense also, there is nothing intrinsicness in that, right? There's no intrinsic possessor. There's no intrinsic, parts that are being possessed by that. So that would be the third one, right? A possessor and possessed. Then the fourth one is that the whole will is dependent upon its parts, and all the parts are dependent upon the will itself. That's interdependent thing. So again, there is nothing intrinsically because they're dependent, right? So that would be the fourth sort of part if you look at that. And okay, did I miss one? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, no. Okay, so the possessor and possessed is counted as 2, sorry. So there is 4, and this should be the, possessor is 1, sorry, and what we call the dependent on each other, that's counted as 2, right? The will is not dependent on its parts, right? And the intrinsic will is not dependent on its parts. Intrinsic parts are not dependent on its will, right? Those are 2. That would be 5. Now the sixth one is the collection, meaning that if we dismantle the whole will and then put a heap of all the pieces together, that's a collection of the parts, right? And there is no intrinsically existent will in all of this collection. The aggregate, in other words. That's the sixth one. And the seventh one is look to the shape. When we kind of put all the pieces together, then we have the will, isn't it? Like when all parts are separate, we don't have a shape. But when we put everything in the shape, then they said there is no intrinsically existent shape there, isn't it? So this is how it's called sevenfold chariot reasoning analysis, and so we could not find anything intrinsically existent. So we used that to be able to understand how there is no intrinsic self of a person. Right?
What did that do? Because Shingda number doing change, number doing the Gachito, Shingda the Yelani, Tadi Rivati, Shena and Rangi to Tadi Mari, so do that. Pindu Yana Shingda, Shingda Yana 2 years, Pindu Teva, Raja Teva Yamaris. No.
So Geshe wants to kind of clarify this, that conventionally speaking, right, so we have a will and its parts, right, and they are different, they're not one the same. But here we're not talking in a conventional way, we're just talking about there is no intrinsically existent will or a parts, right? If they were, they would either have to be identically the same one, or they would have to be distinctively different, in which case they become unrelated thing. The same thing, the whole will is dependent upon its parts. All the parts are dependent upon the whole will. So that kind of interdependent origination exists. We are not refuting that. But what we're saying is that there is no intrinsically existent will or a part. They are dependent on each other. There couldn't be, right? Right.
Yeah. Shingda yana motadi do da chegin shingda kora chegin bena yana kholo da ine te tsabdi ga chegre je dodo chegre sheda royu chwa sia de ya ine moji tadi is ya do de tadi ine tadi kabuna je tadi deme sia kaza dojo ine chig 타데 데미 찍세요. 좀 아니 지금이 타데 사서 들이 이어도 들이 잔 샤도 말이스. 어디서다.
So the idea here is, yes, conventionally we know that a will and its parts are very different, and they are dependent on each other. So we are not really refuting any of those things. We have said, hypothetically speaking, if a will were to be intrinsically existent, then it could only exist in a couple of ways, isn't it? Either it would have to exist as just a single phenomenon, means identical with all of its parts, in which case then we cannot, how should I say, separate the parts from the whole, isn't it? Because they have to be exactly the same. They're just kind of a, what called the carbon copies of each other, kind of, it's exactly the same. And if they were to be different intrinsically, then they would have nothing to do with each other. It's just like as, different as a pillar and a vase, isn't it? A pillar and a vase are unrelated and totally different entities, right? It would have to be like that, but they are not. They are dependent on each other. So Geshe-la's explanation pertains to what you find at the end of page 190 and top of page 191. And so basically Geshe-la re-explained what he already explained, where if things were to be intrinsically existent, and if they were to be identical, then anything that is identical, we cannot talk about difference, right? With regard to that, right? There cannot be distinctiveness, because, like, say, if a pillar and a vase were to be identical, either it has to be a pillar, it has to be a vase. They cannot be pillar and a vase, That's intrinsically. But if they were intrinsically different, then they have to be as distinctive as a pillar and a vase, have nothing to do with each other. But that's not the case with a chariot, right? A chariot is dependent upon all of its parts. So here, we are engaged in what normally, for lack of a better word in English, I suppose, ultimate analysis of how, a chariot actually exists, right? What we call the ontology of a chariot. Professors love to call it ontological status there. So then we analyze the chariot ontologically in those 7 different ways, then we cannot find anything that can be pinpointed as intrinsically existent, And so that establishes that a chariot is, lacks intrinsic self, right? And so, as Geshe said before, so this kind of 7-fold reasoning, this is just an example or metaphor, but we can apply something to, the self of a person. And so among many reasons, this is regarded as the Rigpa Yaksha, means the best reasoning or analysis. So on top of page 191, it reads, it does not make sense that a chariot intrinsically possesses its parts. This is because the two ways of possession of what is essentially different or essentially the same, respectively, like Upagupta possessing an ox and Upagupta possessing a form, are nothing other than the relationships of identity and difference, and both of these have already been negated. So another example given here is a person by the name of called Upagupta, right? And he owns an ox or a cow, right? So he's owner. But in this case, we know that Upagupta as a person and the cow or the ox that he owns are different, two different things, right? They have no relationship with each other, right? Ox is not a part of Upagupta, Upagupta is not a part of an ox, so he just owns an ox, Whereas when we talk about Upagupta having a form, now that's related to him, isn't it? Right? It's not like an ox, it is your form. So what we are talking about here is that if things are intrinsically different, then it has to be like an Upagupta and his cow or an ox, right? But if they were identical, then it would be something similar to Upagupta and his form, Yeah.
What did you call that? Yeah, cause Ronji Tadi Yoga, Mu Tadi Vagas, Micheros, she the Tadi in the Jimmy Toshi Gavanashi. That Kaza Muji in the chick, Kaza Tadi Demi chick. What today is Rashi Shubasatelia, and Muji Tadi is out with the interior yard of Sanshaya Marshall, and the number doing shit that the number was said, she that Pajayadi done the theory Karsa. Kansa Dami driver require shooting is. But tell it then, Tinima Pumana said that Omanshiguana in the Kansa Dami drove in the theory was the Shushan couple of drove or this Tombo Kansa and Shia and what they will use this word.
So I think, the instrumental thing is we have to, have this clear notion of, intrinsicness or intrinsic, entityness or existence, isn't it? And so hypothetically speaking, as we say, there's nothing that exists intrinsically, especially from Prasangika point of view, as we're talking about. And if things were to exist intrinsically, now means it should be findable, isn't it? So it has to be findable as being identical with all its parts. If they are identical things don't have distinctiveness because they are carbon copies of each other, isn't it? Same thing. But if they are different intrinsically, then they have nothing to do with each other. They are very distinctive, isn't it? Just like Upagupta and a cow, or a vase and a pillar, like that. So under such analysis, one is not able to locate or find, any kind of intrinsicness there. And so in the supplemental middle way, when we talk about dealing with selflessness of a person and phenomena, because of the basis, it's recommended that first we deal with the selflessness of a person, right? Try to understand, if there were to be a self of a person, then how should it exist or how would it exist, right? So once we understand that, using, let's say, sevenfold analysis and reasoning, using chariot as an example, once we establish the selflessness of a person, now it's a matter of focusing on some other phenomenon and use the same logic, reasoning, So that's what Geshe just said.
That Did you that you are Jomarva? Did you that Yomarva? Or that top of some Shindaina? Did you sing that Yanaka? Do you Yomarva? What they Shinda in lots of Shindaina or the yana S203 가서 신다 요구도 소디 태군도 스테다 절대는 가사 마셔고다.
No. So a mere aggregation or collection of all the parts of a chariot does not make the chariot, isn't it? Because if we kind of dismantle the whole chariot and kind of heap the whole part, all the parts are there, nothing is missing, but we don't call that a wheel or a chariot, isn't it? It's just there. So it's a mere collection, which is an aggregate, is not a chariot. No.
that 타주자 타디의 편집되면서 가지 편집되면 순인식도 신단연화 때문에 연화 신단 때문에 이些엔직타디 는 대바시 속바시 속바예 düra 어디 타진사디 자가시.
So I guess I'll basically run through the list of the 7 for analysis, where we talk about the so it is the sameness and difference, or identicalness or distinctiveness, whichever way you want to put it, there, right? Oneness and the multiplicity. We use all kinds of words here. So that's 2, right there. And then we said that when we the whole will looks like that wholeness possesses its parts, right? So that's another one, 3rd one, right? Because there is no intrinsically possessing the parts there. And then we talk about the dependency here, that the wholeness is dependent upon its parts, and its parts are dependent upon the wholeness, right? There is nothing intrinsically, in that way. So that's 2, that should be 5. And then we said the duba, the whole aggregate or the collection of the pieces of the puzzle, so to speak, is not the chariot. And then the shape, when everything is fixed together, there is a shape. Somebody might say that, well, actually the chariot is that shape, so that there is nothing intrinsicness with that. So these are called the 7-fold analysis, or namdun in Tibetan, right? Nam means aspect or ways, and dun means 7.
다들 신대 스분네가 신대 연아는 신대 이해서 강가 요거를 콜로다 속신이 강가 득셔나기도 어디가 말아. 팀에서 마주는 신대 요마라. 다 마주는 신대 매가 나시 리벤네가 매가 타야죠. 양은 리벤네가 신대 요나 이 소송가 요저죠. 근데 그냥 뉴스만 오된 시고라 대다디 신대 거기 빼자 레라
So as Geshe said before, that a mere collection or aggregate or pile up of all the parts of a chariot, nothing missing there, that's not called a chariot, isn't it? And nor is like the whole chariot pieces fixed together. There is nothing intrinsic will there either, isn't it? If we were to find an intrinsic chariot in the shape, then there's no reason why we couldn't find the intrinsic will in the collection of the parts as well. So this way, when you analyze, this is called 7-fold analysis, but if we sort of expand it, then we can find that a lot of fallacies come up.
Birikte ngamalu la soba dizo motona ti yeb dizo so jiba medejin shinda ne dizo jiba tedagi kelangde yara sozonje se dahi dizo debe sheros otimja 신다 소비 신다 이해게 가서 신다 레도 말이스 되는 거마다 섬서 men시스 말이야 어디 로라야 초등 신다도 누 말이스 어디 이해게 링 말 direct 신다 켈링 말이스 신다 제스 줘봐 Tidage, Kelam des, Tayunamje, Dagi, Zio de Devisheros. The Tayu said, in Koy, Dagi Koje, thousands and the Kozu said, Dagi Yamina, in the Telayat, the Tau Kazan, Yoto, Yeva, Jimaji, in thousands and Yash Guru, Yamana, Korangi, Muni, Yamana, could Dahido, or the Nia water. What is on that? The kind of Gordon, in the same Chimata was Shandro, Shuni Chimata was Shandro, the Shadumazadua. She tell you Shuni Chimata was Shaguri. Ronji Mrs. Sim Chimata was Shaguri. Shuni Chimata was Shavida. Shuni Koratayo Sosa. In the Shuni Chimata was Shuni Latavi, the thousands and Dahizi, Nigmara, Timeda. In the Ronji Mrs. Gordon, Sim Chimata was Shagua. That you Chuni Konashimeta was Shagura. That was the because the Hashagori. But that was the Gona. Chuni Shimeta was Shavina. And the Dahi the Carson, Shuni Shagar, Shuni Konatakon, Zio Maisa, and quite Tayo Khan, Ibatelia, Dosa, Zio, I said, the short over.
No.
This is the Gordania. Sim Chimeta was Shagar, Ranji, Shuni Chimeta was Shagomai. Tell you a Shagua, what did you do?
No, again, Rangiba mentioned the Chetam Tayo in a Tayo Gishaka zero course, near where zero course go.
Or the hit the zero in waters.
You got the near course or actually was Rogan. So here, Gisela read, the second paragraph from the bottom up on page 191, and so Gisela is talking about even the realist Tibetan Buddhist Mawa, they are not going to say that a shape of a chariot is the chariot, right? Let alone Pasangikas here. So then Geshe started to kind of connect that with the notion of Gokten, the truth of cessation, right? Gokten, and it's kind of related there. So according to Sevatandika Madhyamikans and schools below within Buddhist school of thought, they say that there has to be a substantially existent basis of designation for whatever is designated on that, right? So they talk about tagyo, means designated reality or imputed reality, whatever you want to say that, but that imputation or designation is done on some basis of designation, and that basis of designation has to be substantially existent, zeyu, right? And so this is why when they talk about the state of cessation of, let's say, suffering and obscurations, they're talking about how mind can be completely be freed of or pure of all the obscurations, right? So when the mind is completely free of the obscuration, that's a state of cessation. You know with me? So they talk about that mind can be defiled, and defilements can be purified or eliminated, and then you achieve the state of cessation. Whereas Prasangikas, they talk about that the chewing, the sphere of emptiness itself, the Dharma Dhatu, the space of emptiness itself is free of obscurations. With me? And because according to Prasangika, nothing is findable under analysis. Everything is merely designated, is it? Right? And so there doesn't have to be a substantially existent basis of designation for things, right? And so that's a big difference between Prasangika's standpoint with regard to the state of cessation, Gokten, right? That the state of what we call the chewing, the sphere or the space of emptiness, Dharma Dhatu is the perfect Sanskrit word, is free of defilements, is free of obscurations. Whereas the Sevatantrika Madhyamikans and schools down below, they don't assert it. They said that the mind is free of defilements, isn't it? Because mind is substantially existent. So that's another big difference between these schools of thought.
What this is because I the money that she marries to them. Number do the service, money not the chick that is them to chick that is yes, somewhere yet. So doing the money that you not teach you what the money was said. In a Dhamma Dorjee, that is required Shinda debate. Dhamma Dorjee, Shinda Petty then, and show them. Dhamma Dorjee do what the koala is. Or that because Shingde Petty, yeah, because Dhamma charge of lies. She doesn't Dhamma Rigwa Mamodi or the Shinatan, Namdi was at the yard as I did it.
The Yagre Lagandi can think you but Chigore, Shambazo Shigore.
Namdi Gaga, you know, that she had to tell you accommodation, that like I share me to tell you how to share.
So as Geshe explained, that this what called the sevenfold analysis and reasoning, Namdunji Rigpa, 7-aspect reasoning, literally translating, using a chariot or Shingda as an example, is regarded as the best kind of analysis reasoning to establish selflessness. Selflessnesses, let's say, selflessness of a person, and then you focus on all other phenomena using the same analysis. You realize the selflessness of phenomena as well. So if we understand those 7 aspects or the 7 ways, right, and try to locate if there is anything that exists intrinsically in some shape or form, right, we couldn't. So when we run through the whole analysis and we couldn't find anything intrinsically existent, right, that establishes the lack of intrinsicness. It could be intrinsicness of the self of a person or intrinsicness self of a phenomenon. Okay? So that's if something were to exist intrinsic, it would have to be findable, among these 7 ways, right? There is no other option left out there, right?
What did you call Don't repeat Java last. The Bunny Ray Java Chick Marina. Da Kelama Tomevata. Tower. Da Jizzy Tower. That the silver guy said, because I did Pumbo Rangi Chick Mina. Pumbo was Da Kela, Da said, you said the kid two maris. We call Pumbo some Mira, she said. And da Geshe in the tower, Pumbo Geshe or so that Chiro that way said is a gear or that Pumbo da Pumbo ina Pumbo got Jigdra, the Chiro killing her.
No.
She had da Geshe in charge of rules. Or this she told them. Da Mamboy, Pumbo Nayo, Tagana, and da Mamboy so saw the number she was. Pumbunga then Pumbunga da Nari, the Kazaji da Nashara, Kazanga Shadu.
No.
Oh, this is that.
So when we apply this kind of reasoning or analysis to the self of a person, try to locate if there were such thing as intrinsic self of a person. So we couldn't look at anything. So let's say if there were to be an intrinsic self of a person, and if one were to assert that that self of a person is identical with aggregates, isn't it? A number of issues come up. Well, number one, the aggregates are impermanent, right? They undergo momentary changes, whereas the non-Buddhist schools of thought say that the self or the Atma is a permanent, right? It doesn't change. So it couldn't be the aggregates, isn't it? And then also aggregates are not just one, aggregates are 5 at least. So if they were to be identical with aggregates, then there would have to be 5 Atmas or self, right? But that they wouldn't say that either, What
did it call it? Pumbo die in a 풍부 로 다세 지다 무지코라 take march. What this was pena this did what? Because this is that because nyal da dinyo pena shivata da 풍부 로 da me da kelam to jode da 풍부 민근나라다 이제 스페나 다와다 리모젠 시노스 저 다와스다 다 리모젠스나 찍어라 제가 이 풍부서 찍샤 이 다스 찍샤 니샤 문두스 다와스 찍샤 리모젠 니샤 뭐 어디나지 이 다부니 뭐 찍이나 그래서 뭐 찍는 다들 되면 찍이래도 되다 이 다부 소소 샤야 문두 다 그런 풍부 다 누구도 내가 풍부 다 저기 코이 타대 해야 문도 스테지고다 다 보니 같이 째도 타와들이 다 전달해 되나
타대 매비 김제 가셔 오래
라
타대 매비 김제도 가셔 오래
타대 매비 주대데 로이 좀 째 고찌나 째기 고로 째는 타대야 말아
라래
어디서다
awesome. So to continue with that kind of argumentation here, that if the intrinsic self of a person were to be identical or just the same as the aggregates, then we cannot talk about aggregates and the self as if they are distinctive, right? Because anything that's identical, there is no distinctiveness. That's what we talked about before. It's just like, sometimes one thing we call by different names, but it all refers to the same thing. But in Tibetan and I think in the Sanskrit, in the poetic, they use expressions like the moon is also called the one with the rabbit or something, right? The one with the rabbit is the moon. Actually, there's nothing different from the moon. But if you were consider the moon as one thing, the one with the rabbit is another thing, then they are totally different, distinctive things. That couldn't be, right? Yeah.
신다 메가 되다 신다 모시 제소지 탄제 담시 메데가 저로 냐면 좀메데 남바 dwi기 제네 뎀바 인제디 신다 많이 메 뭐지 신다 메가 men주지 딱도 제네 니네 신다 샤바 men지 메지 남바 마제 바라지 지대에 다니자 되네 진조라 조조야 나게 야나래 되네 답에 답을 조베 이비실 주발에 되네 지니 지대죠 나바도 유주 메모지 남시메가 지대 있는데 라게 야나데 도고 시바타로스 Dai and number did any hinda major the Maris. Jide Tanya is a charm, thousands and shamars, Shinda says, Jide Tanya Chazulia, and Shavu, thousands and Yashinda Shavu Maras, Timesa and thousands in the Manina Jonga Marisoda, Jide Chazu Sharva.
So we are on top of page 192. There is a citation from Supplement to the Middle Way, translated here as Introduction to the Middle Way. So as Geshe explained, that when we apply this seven-fold analysis reasoning to this example, a chariot, and we couldn't find anything that is intrinsically existent at all with a chariot, whether the whole thing or any of the parts, etc. Because if it were to exist that way, then we would have to find it in one of these seven ways, right, to exist. Because we couldn't find it, so what that tells us is that the chariot lacks intrinsic nature and intrinsic identityness, isn't it? It doesn't mean a chariot doesn't exist at all. Yeah? So when we call chariot something like what it is, that is simply presented from what we call the conventional perspective. This is how the world says, well, that's called chariot, that's called whatever it is, isn't it? And the conventional perspective does not undergo into all this deeper ultimate analysis, and then they find something like, okay, here now we decide it's called chariot. That's not how it works. According to Pasengikas, that we accept things as people have labeled them from conventional reality point of view, isn't it? Nothing needs to be findable under analysis, right? Whatever is merely designated, the designated phenomenon doesn't need to be found under ultimate analysis, and that's fine. They could still exist conventionally, they function, and that's the Prasangika standpoint. Okay.
No, da Geshe de Rang Yana Geshe Phuntsok Gyeltsen Tadi de Yuba Dava Shadi Jigtadi Kani Dava Shadi Jigtadi Kani Dava Shadi Yuna Jigtadi Kanu Yushada Yuna Kasi Jigtadi Yaman Tadi Misharawa Igoshi Tadi Karun Igoshadi Yuna Jigtadi Kanu Shavish Tadawana, I think they should consider the Shipungo Ninja Rangi, check my Da Pumbo de Rangi Tadi mine, Da Pumbo the Mood Nigi Demba mine. She thought Da Pumbo Dingo, Kansa in the Pumbo Yorba, or did Demba Yor the Rangi to be said this year. Because that. Daba, I think that so even mentioned Dr. Kazada, that he pumbo ninja, Raji my da pumbo da pumbo le Raji Tadi my da pumbo the Muni Tadi my da Puni Tenzin Dorjee Debe. Raji did me shorting your mind. Pumbo Toson Kaza mine. Pumbo Yagi, Kuba Chevaji, Kaza Maino. Told that regret Jovada. Dabuni Raji Jig made. You know, dark hair of Tomeva Tevada. Da Jig da Geshe in the tower. Da Mambur. Tawa Soji, John Song Juan Las, but the Rajir Tadi, da Pumoni Rajir, da Mongota, da Pinigasa, the Tavus. Da Jimmy Mayor, Pumbola Jimmy Mayor, do Yaman the Pumbo, Mambo, and da Mambo, was never something you would do. Says that Dabuni Raji and Tadi da Moshi Kaya Maris, or
So we are on page 192, and the second paragraph, that's what Geshe read and started to explain. So that basically indicates the application of the sevenfold analysis reasoning to the I or the self of a person. Right? First we dealt with the chariot as an example. Now we're applying the theoretical concept or application to the self of a person or I or a person. So here, we use the word jigta, the transitory collective self, or the view of transitory collection. We translate in many ways. And so it is focused on that I or the self as if it exists intrinsically in and of itself, isn't it? And so we don't reject it right away. We say if it were to exist, right, intrinsically, hypothetically speaking, then it would have to be findable under analysis, isn't it? And so we apply the sevenfold aspects of the reasoning analysis. If the self, intrinsic self, which is the focus of the transitory collective perspective, cognition, were to exist intrinsically, either it would have to exist as being identical with the aggregates. That's one way, right? Or it would have to exist as being different from, right, distinctive from the aggregates. So if it were to be identical with the aggregates, then so many issues come up as we talked about before, right? Aggregates are impermanent, but that intrinsic self is permanent. Aggregates are not just one reality, there are 5 of them, so then there would have to be 5 selves or whatever, right? That's not going to work here. And then if it were to exist like a distinctively different, then the self, the person and their aggregates will have nothing to do with each other. They become completely unrelated thing, you know. Or we would say that if they were identical, just as there is one self, then all the aggregates have to be just one. They cannot be 5 anymore, right? Those are part of the reasonings there. So the aggregates are the basis of designation we call Dakshi, right? The person or the self or the Purusha is designated on that, right? A designated reality and the basis of designation we're talking about. Of course, conventionally, they are dependent on each other, isn't it? And so we use the word tentempa, the dependency here translated as, that which supported, isn't it? So that kind of thing. So intrinsic self could not be supported by its basis of designation, the aggregates. And the basis of designation could not really support the intrinsic self, right, designated onto that. So that's part of the 7-fold analysis we are dealing with here. Conventionally, as Geshe said, a person or a self or I, Purusha has aggregates, right? Nobody denies that, But when we think in terms of intrinsic concept, then there is no intrinsic self, so there cannot be an intrinsic possessor or intrinsic person who has, aggregates or form or anything like that. Okay. What else do we have? Oh, yes. So Geshe would like to stop there today, so we didn't finish that part there. So we would like to welcome questions. First we'll go to our Dharma friends in the cyberspace. If not, we'll come back here. We don't have? Okay. Oh, you have. Okay. Oh, anybody can start.
About the jikta, it is, I've heard it translated as deluded view of transitory collection, which presupposes that it's always deluded. The jikta is a deluded view of transitory. So, like you said, the inherent is deluded. It doesn't exist, which means it will end at arhathood, that it will not appear anymore once a person hits arhathood.
Okay.
It would still appear after the path of seeing, but bye-bye. It will not appear anymore.
Okay.
That's the question.
Okay, sure. Kona kandisho di ken jikta yo rwa gen. Jikta sigen di kasogoda nyomo jen shago rwa sa rwa gen. Imbe ina ane kasogoda chachumbe kobang thodu kalia jikta di meb chadu do du wes ko rwa gen.
Jikta bang du.
Rwa mebe ne en chachumbe nyomo ma ro chadu rwa gen. Da jikta mebe ina da nga sigen chal ha gu rwa gen.
Nga de la du.
Also. Yeah, that's right. The view of transitory collective or view of transitory collection, jikta, is a diluted view. And so when we achieve arhatship, it is no more there, right? It is gotten rid of, yeah.
Okay. Is the belief that do we get rid of the belief? Or is it still basically appearing and we're not believing it, or is it not appearing?
Okay. Kurang this or the chachamba thoba ina rawage. Ta ngandu namji jigdal da yije se shamba che rawage. Shamba de chigo meba chabre ane chachamba chabre ina da de rawage. Ane rangshin ruba chun manama jigdal man nang kaso da nangshin yi ga do rugo re khande re sa chachamba. Nawa yo ba che shamba. No so. Nawa de yo shaba che.
Nawa de yo shaba da jimba ya mara.
No so ade jimba yo mara. Nawa de yo shaba chachamba. Yes, there could be appearance, but there is no belief or clinging to that. Yeah, yes,
about the jikta. It said that it's diluted, which is heard that, but it's neither. I've heard that it's neither virtuous nor non-virtuous. It's unspecified. How could that be?
Okay. The Quran can show the jikta the rawage. Jikta the tang azu nyomo chen re lab rawage. In a tanda shung der shabe jikta the ke kewaya mare rawage. Ane kar so gore da lungma den ro sha dawage. Jikta the ke mai ke khaya ma lungma den sha rawa. Ati kan de se nyomo chen re ya lungma den re lam na khal gore sa ke.
Nyomo chen de re.
La.
Nyomo chen de re.
In a tama da lungma den kan de sha ro sa ke mi ke nyomo ina mi ke bar sha ro sa.
Lungma den de je ko kar na gesem mo de je de yo de re mi ke ngo je yo de ko. 그 개미가 가루이 찍고 저한테 여마라. 코가 가루이 있는 여대봐.
알레. 아디에서는 루마덴 샤고르 바게.
어디서 내가 루마덴 샤고르데.
알레 개와에 말에 미게 말에 소.
디다디 게슴도 되고 주도다는 거 미가 있는 게슴을 주고 메샤르 고르가.
라레.
다 미가 있는 거 가서 겨 있는 거 여미가 뭐지 메샤 고르. 대샤 거 개미가 가리고 전 체스카야 말아 그런 거 여대거라.
The reason is called unspecified, right? Neither positive nor negative is because it's kind of look like, I mean, in our condition, that's the assumption, right? Ever present there, whether you have a positive thought or you have a negative thinking, you know, it doesn't go away. Even if we have some positive thinking, that jikta could still be there. Of course, if you're doing negative one, it's there. So that's why it is a delusion, right? But it is called unspecified one because it's present with both, you know, positive thinking and negative thinking. Yeah.
But isn't it a problem that to call it a delusion or affliction? Since the definition of delusion or affliction is a phenomenon which causes suffering, and if it's unspecified, then it doesn't necessarily cause suffering. Jikta.
Ale kona ngri sigwa ke da lungma dengi ko wa se bala namju nyomo chen se tu kala rwa ke ane tunge ke ba chigen jelo nyomo chen se go rwa sa rwa ke
말
tunge denje jelo nyomo chen ka cha wo la
루마덴스서 겨 많이 메가 많이
me ke nyomo yo rwa ke nyomo ke chen de tunge denje yam ke je jelo nyomo se go rwa ke nyomo rwa nyomo ke
어라
ta di imba ina ane jikta di ke tunge den de go rwa da ba rwa ke 제가 ane ko 가서 nyomo cha da yo rwa 제주 가라 ane ko lungma den sa na lungma den sa do ko tunge den ba lungma den go rwa so da 자 lungma den ke ko wa se ba sung bu me ro ke
루마덴스서 그 직자고 따와 계획신내가다 여대게 메가 내가 요 코타와 여대가 맞아 그 지워 그 신 개미가 줘야 말아
그래 다 가서 독반 내시고 독반
자꾸 그런 지상 직자스나 나가 스코랑 비게 지시무시야 나 지시무시야 sem지서 그러면서 진짜 개미가 산까 저거 말이야
알단데 데 직다 세야 되긴 랑시르베 랑시르베 짐베 짐바들 직다 샤고 말베
라
랑시르베 짐베 짐바들 직다 샤고 말베
랑이 랑이 저바 지게다 직다 샤고
시고르바 이는 디 루마덴 레스 그 동에 데마 치고 데 루마덴 인다 룽데 데마 치고 말베
마코 뭐서 그 동에 가야 저거 말다 그 말을 걸 때는 니 뭐 현다 때는 미가 용도 용거라 뭐 그런 뭐샤네 근데 그 미가 가 저거 말
알아 코란 랑기 뭐스 동에 된 거 말스 동에 녀모 샹바 데네 아니 동에 지고 숨어
어디 저 누가 저 녀모 영은 다 샤바지 영 당하게도 지레신에 신이 용거라다
Yeah, I want to Geshe to come out as clearly, so I had to prop more. Otherwise, Geshe gives one word to explain it in stage, and sometimes I even don't understand what he's thinking. So it takes a little while here. So Geshe says that the jikta we're talking about, that's the ignorance, isn't it? Ignorance itself, you know, does not, how should I say, literally causes suffering. Then it gives rise to other delusions, right? Then which, gives rise to the suffering. And ignorance itself is present in all the situations, whether we have positive thinking or negative. That's what is called unspecified. Yeah.
About the jikta, said that Geshe said it appears, but we don't grasp. Well, but it's a jikta is not a cognitive obscuration; it's an afflictive obscuration. So it has to be completely gone upon attaining arhatship. So it cannot really appear, because it's an afflictive, right?
Okay.
It's not a cognitive obscuration. Well, basically, that's the what appears is the eye, but the eye is not jikta, right?
Yeah. Okay. Quran can share this with that jikta the gain that gari sundu kan la charge on be ko ban tho ro again. Jikta ki nawa the yo show the shamba yo mar sun ro again. Shong ba again.
La.
And charge on be ko ban tho in na ro again. Jikta ki nang show the shamba the yo mar sun ro again.
Ma kada chiba nang shori se.
Ta ru ba ta ru ba nang show ro wa. Je Quran situ ka la this go ra da jikta Quran yomo sha ba ina ro again. And chiba ni ga na ne nyundi ro again. Charge on ba tho ka nyundi sasang pang sa ro again. Nyundi sasang pang sa de ka la ta nawa de khande de go ra sa nawa de mon me gu ro so nyundi mi na ina nawa de shidip sha go ro be.
La.
Nawa de shidip sha go ro be.
No de pichi da shidip shana ngi jire.
No so. Ale nawa de shidip che. Jimba de nyundi sha de go ro be. Jikta ke nawa de shidip che jimba de.
Da khoi demba chba nawa se go ra.
No la on.
Demba de na sa de khoi sang ma je ba de ya ro.
La ale.
Sha shu ji.
Ale no. Yeah, Geshe feels that yes, when we talk about the jikta, right, that's what called the belief or the clinging is the delusion. So that's completely gotten rid of when you become arahat. But that appearance of true existence, whatever, that is part of cognitive, of that. It's cognitive obscuration. Because until we become Buddha, it's always there.
Another one.
Sure.
On page 188 at the very top.
Wait a minute, page what?
188
Okay.
at the very top paragraph, at the end of the paragraph. This could be a translation thing. It's just throwing me off. They're saying the 3 times are in conflict. That they really mean to say they're distinct, because the word conflict makes me think they're fighting against one another.
So
the 3 times.
Wait a minute, Reina, which one you said? Is it paragraph 1 or 2?
Yeah, paragraph 1.
Okay.
At the very end of that paragraph, it was talking about the 3 times. It says the 3 times are in conflict.
Oh, yeah.
Do you see that?
Yes.
I mean, that's probably a question for you. Are they translating different into the word conflict? Because conflict makes me think they're fighting against each other.
Sure. Okay. Let me read it one more time. Therefore, it's not like the past or the future, even though they are the same in having arisen and not ceased in their own time, since they have different qualities. The 3 times up. Tagi can the toward the shagore karsogore tanda tuisum sharo again. Tuisum shadan jo again. Tuisum shadan the any this go again tanda. Tuisum de so gi da kaso yenden kaga yores ro again. And tuisum de pasu kaso de matimber chorbe. Tuisum de chikal tap denga sa matimber chorbe. Tuisum de ba deba da mao ba da tada ba sa chorba so gi yenden ro chorba. Dige de samal matimber mitimber ke cha yo marwa.
Tuisum de khandes.
Tuisum de kaso 참 하려 버체 가서 뒤숨 데 파즈 가서 타바스 뒤숨 녀라 가서 마디베 sommar보다 마디베 되니까 저 말바 대야보다 다다바 뒤숨 샤드 가라 디 가서 오라 가서 네
마디 뒤숨 야도 다다사도 그런 거 건데 텔마가 봐서 그 라마 요리스 그러
나오
단 대바사데 수지파 매버 샤고리 모스 처지 제저 모스 마저가 내가 샤워로 어떻게 샤워만 체크해야 말이야.
이네 뒤숨 샤다들 전에 파솔이야 가서다 마디버데 게요 말아 샤다 나올라 가서 마디버 속으로 다게
뭐지 봐요. 다 전주와시는 뒤숨과 무보 있어요. 전다
말에
런지 왜 되게 내 마음 무보 일라고 말이야.
말이네 디 I think, that must be it, because it's not working, because Kishla, I couldn't find the right Tibetan word in text, so that's a mutually exclusive, that's right, yes. Lost can thank you for that, that's it,
According to Svatantrika, cessation is an imputation, right?
What?
Cessation is merely an imputation or non-associated compositional factor. Svatantrika,
right?
Svatantrika, yes.
Okay. No, the Svatantrika Madhyamika or Sautantrikas?
Svatantrika. Svatantric. We call it Savatantric. We call it Svatantric.
Okay, so what's the, again?
It's an imputation. It's not emptiness, right?
Okay.
According to Svatantrikas.
Yes.
That's what we just heard that.
Yes.
Whereas according to Prasangikas, cessation is emptiness.
Yes.
Is that correct? So it's an imputation, which is a non-associative compositional factor. Whereas according to Prasangikas, it's emptiness. I'm not sure about that. Of course, it's a particular type of emptiness, the emptiness of a mind that is free of obscurations. Whereas according to Svatantrikas, it's the mind being free of obscurations.
Yes.
The absence of the obscurations is designated, is imputed as a sensation.
Right, or the mind is the basic designation, right? Substantial existence, yeah.
Right. So that's what
That's
Geshe
right.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, that's right.
What happens when, all right,
Yeah.
when the Svatantrikas apply the sevenfold reasoning?
Right.
And so will they find at the end that the chariot doesn't exist intrinsically, ultimately, but exists intrinsically, conventionally?
Okay.
And
Sure.
what would that be? Which
Okay.
one? Which of these features would they
Sure.
designate as the basis of designation?
Sure.
Called the basis of designation.
Koran condition de disagore da danda gen namding de rigba che rawage namding rigba de rawage ane rangju bag rawage namding rigba de pheje shigir bas rawage tame sha ba ina ane ta khonje ane ta tame de namding rigba thon rawage ta second de ten tambar rangshing du medus rawage tanye do rangwen de du chas dinde la go khonje nye de garin ye gresa namding rigba 랑주베 남중그리고 배출 시그르베 말레스 와게
알레 비를 시쇼거든.
제베 이나다 콘저 룹드는데 가르래서 다 세겐데 된 담발 와게 랑싱이 미루스 타니에도 랑싱도 룹세인데 콘저 녜된 뒤로 배사
데데레.
된 담발 미루스 타니에도 랑싱 룹세 들라고
레와 데데레 다테 저드잖아. 데버트베 찍뭐 데버트 타데 마이 데버트베 데바마 dos 자루 찍봐라. 랑싱이 자 찍봐라데.
이나마도 콘저 랑싱 룹 켈링겨 와게
로유 저와 켈링고 데버트와 켈링 말아지.
알레 콘저 랑싱 룹 쓰게 말 알레 템바 룹 라데 거 yeah, I think they will change the instead of intrinsic because that's their strong, but they will say true existence, right? Yeah.
Will they find it? So they will find it also that it doesn't exist intrinsically, ultimately.
Right. And
find that also it does because they don't assume they don't assert that it exists ultimately, intrinsically. So will they find that the lack of intrinsic existence ultimately?
Right. Kwanza namde rigwa peje shebe ina rawage namde ringbe thone rawage temba druma de rangjubege namde rigbe thone temba druma de chebe rawage chedio kala thame thajo da temba maruba chita kwanza thong rawage ine ten tambala ya rangwe ne mebadi kwanza ha kogo ya kogo ya mare sage namde rigbe thone
랑원 좀 맞아봐야 하고요 말아봤지.
네 코란즈 그 가서 타니에 뒤에 셰셰
그거는 그 코란즈 제가 되게 가사 샤가티 메시고 맞아. 제가 나 이게 메시고 말아.
먼저 네 가사 말아봐게. Yeah. Geshe said no because for them intrinsic existence is not object of negation, right? So that cannot be refuted through analysis. Then at the end of analysis, they think ultimately they won't say that, right? But they will use the term Tembardruba, the true existence as the object of negation, use the sevenfold reasoning, and then at the end what they find is that the self doesn't exist truly, but they're still in their assertion, it is intrinsically existent. That's their standpoint. Right? Yeah.
So don't they assert that?
Yeah.
Just that they don't assert ultimate existence of intrinsic existence, that intrinsic existence exists ultimately. Don't they say that?
Okay. Yeah, when the Namji Rangju Beg develop again, Rangwen Duba said the Tanyedo and show them the Rangwen Duba yes Robagain. Turn Tambar Rangwen Duba didn't like Marwa.
No, this is where
Turn Tambar Rangwen mess.
동다바 랑원이 요마리시 랑원조 요마르와 랑원조 메다 동다바 랑원 메 타시자라
맞네 랑주 베스고 되게 엄마 랑주 베
랑지 버스 찍어야다
이네 근데
근데 동다바 메스 라자르와 제가 동다바 랑이 뭐저 타시자라 그거 동다바 코나 메바다 그거 랑이 주가 요마르와
알레 이네 타니에도 랑시 두바 예스
타니에도 랑이 줘야다
That's right, yeah, what you said right. So they will say ultimately there is no intrinsic, right? But conventionally that there is intrinsic existence. They will say that, yeah. because nothing exists ultimately for them, you know. You have a question here, maybe a young man, or anybody behind the glass panel.
You guys finish it. I don't want to.
Yeah.
No, everybody. Question.
Yeah.
No, I just have a curiosity question. Is
Sure.
you know when a person designates, okay? So let's say use the example as a person. When I designate, or you designate, or anybody designates this entity as a person, okay? So from a conventional sense of language, what do we use? What do we agree on, or how do we determine what it is that what characteristics? I mean, it's not that are just the basis of imputation, as we all agree what a person is. And the reason I ask is because it seems like there's so many problems with the vocabulary. And one time I saw this this tomb of definitions that the Galoops use for debating, and something like a person or Phuntsok is has this really intense definition. Everything has just a real clear definition of what things are. So I guess my question is since on the side of the lineage holders, they have such a precise way of defining things. What do we use as a society, or how do we, and what would they agree with that we, like when you see a person, what do you have to see before you say that's a person?
Okay.
I hope it doesn't sound stupid, but I mean, there must be something we do. Is we don't just because everybody knows what a person is. When a rabbit hops by, we agree that is a rabbit, even if it's no inherent existence. So in any way, does that make sense?
To an extent, yes, I
To
understand
one
the
extent,
question.
okay.
So,
yeah.
let me see. Okay, let's say this X here. Okay.
Yeah.
So we all agree this X is a person, right?
Yes.
So you said, based on what, right? Are there any qualities we all have figured it out, and we call this person and this thing whatever it is? Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
So how is this established as a person? Is that your question? Okay. 뭐라 컨디션이 됐어 그러게. 당아도 가서 그래. 디 추게 타니에 되게 디 전부 시부시로 와게. 추게 타니에 되게 디베 독부 시부시로 와게. 이제 나 주인들 갈야다 주 드라마를 치도 갈고 코아 드라마를 리기서로 와. jadi ngaza tak bata ane tak samdan dene mangu shigiro wage jaza ane jigden begi ane thanye do dene tak bar sa choro wage sedio kan ya di tak ta de kan sta go re sa bena nganzer gi bena de khasora ta di khangsa re sla bar wage khangsa re la di ta dakshi jil bena khangsa re la bar wage de la dakshi de la ya khangsa ke ming doya ge kyeje ro bi gar sang go yo ra sa ro wage khangsa re la ro wage 상매기 가서 그러다 땅에 되게 간소로 와서 맞아 독사져로 봐게 제단디 비기 낚시될 야 상과의 체조 가르 상만 디 강사래 디 강사 말했을 거로 봐게 아디 딱딱한데 걸 괜찮 세션 나고
드르 레라와 데 노과 가면 까 부마도 강사를 쓰마 수식 계좌셔야 그 상어도가 그 맥도가 진짜 강사 쓰거든요 통제 가가다 강사 쓰거라
제단디 이나 디 인지미 상과의 체조로 상물당 고고요 말
체조가 그 대탕서 뭐 그 정시 그 하고 봐대서 강사 가지 강사 입에도 많이 강사 하고 뭐
이제 시장 따지고
도다 에네 신나지 강사 입에 있어 이제 집에 영어로 와
아니 딘데질 시장에 다샤 디시고로 와게
요 강사
얘는 따가서라면 돼 인지미 좀 안줘 따고 잠을 고고요 나게 따가서들 거 dak시 수다
나는 수다는 저게 강사 탐 배웠다는 저게 야갔다는 제요 그 돈달이 저게는 본바스다이나 그 뜻이 시게 되었지 본바다이 그 태거라 그 본바에 되거라
yeah so what Geshe is saying is like I think it's not necessarily like they have to fulfill some quality. It's more like a common sense thing, right? We all know by common sense what a person is or what is not a person, right? So based with the use of that common sense, then we designate, right? The designators can be us or anybody else. It doesn't have to be necessarily us, you know. So that's what Geshe is saying, you know. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just looking, I guess, there's maybe some in between, so that when we get into these, you know, discussions, that we're a little bit more astute with.
I think, you know, maybe let me see if this is my footnote, okay, not good, okay. If that's hopefully this answer somewhere. I think we all have agreement that in conventionally we are all persons, right? There's nothing we're debating about that, right? But what we're debating about is that is there a such thing as kind of an intrinsic person in any of us? That makes sense? But that's a very different matter, isn't it? And that's a distorted cognition, isn't it? It's just like a coiled rope is called snake. There's no snake, but that's our miscognition, misapprehension, isn't it? But we wholeheartedly believe in that, and that kicks up so many delusions, and then we got entangled in suffering, isn't it? So, you know, so we are not debating about, right, all this table, chair, everything exists, that's function fine as they are. But we kind of attribute, right, some kind of ontological status onto them. It's not there. So that distortion, we call it, right, view of transitory recollection, all these other things, you know what I mean? So we're just trying to tease that out of that. You know, I mean, when I walk, I try to think about what is Tenzin? You know, somebody looks like a crazy person. I don't know who I am. So how does it appear, right? This sense, I know this I, but then when I try to look at what is that I call I, it's really hard to pinpoint everything. You know, only thing person can think is this body. Everybody recognize my form. Oh, there's Tenzin going, right? But then now when we analyze it with that, this is not a Tenzin. This is his body. I mean, so I think we're dealing with two levels of truth. The conventional part we are really not touching here, right? We're dealing with the ultimate ontological status. That's, I think, where the difficulty is. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Go ahead.
Thank you, Geshe. Thank you.
Okay, that's the last one. Then I have some announcement. Yeah.
Okay. I'm a bit lost when we mention about stages of cessation. There's a stages of cessation.
Yes.
That's where I'm lost.
Yes.
And I wonder how it fit into with the analysis that we're talking about.
Okay, how does that fit into all of this?
Yeah.
Okay, sure.
Yeah, thanks.
Dagi kenti gokden kamesh na songage. Gokden kamen na yabage. Rangju be menje se sem ki tibat heba de gokden re tenju bagi roage. Shuyin koran gokden re song yabage. Dige de tanda ngandu de shung del ya tangme ki shung di she de roage. Dela gare jawa khande chago re sa gokden la tanda she de jawa tu. Delhi again, Russian to be time, but nothing regret Chevachi or what. Did a golden Java carry or rest at Delva.
Golden?
Golden, the Java Carcha was at another shung shade de the golden yilla. So again, nothing regret the shady or wage. That is Tame Telabago or wage. That dig Tame Telabavati, golden tobag, the lamb of Chadumar, wage. Java di Chadumar, Java. Namning regret on a time, tell about the golden tobagi, Lamgada must so good. Dig
Langada. Tangme to us, Zuganga, Tashi Ganga, what did then we are here out of shower?
Yeah, so Geshe says that, you know, as it stated, I mean, he didn't quote the text in the Bodhisattva avatar, right? Of all the paths we talk about, the wisdom path is the primary. All others are kind of related to that, right? Secondary related to that. So here, of course, we are dealing with, you know, selflessness, for example. Or sometimes we might use the word emptiness in other contexts. So the reason why we, you know, struggle to understand and establish this is once we realize that this is the path that leads us to the state of cessation, isn't it? You mean? And cessation is the result of, right, realizing this path and then purifying our mind of obscurations. So that is the connection link there. Okay. Yeah. And at the Kasore, Tabra showed in the Yogi. Dunda Shuma, the Ganyung Nero again. Tayomar again. And then the Subming Mantela Sujur the again. Jenna getting them under Chidelia. Soraji get Dulan turns and meeting us as Nepio to the one. Meeting us as Nanam Nepio to the what the master got Tongede, Garden Grobla. 어디라 겐데 가서 다디 개왕 바제도 해서도 겐디 시럽님 그 숭아시는 좋으시게.
가르쳐야지. 그것도
라.
그것도 좀 가르쳐야지.
겐디 소라 도가 남도 소라. 니네 지금 두랑. 두랑 가셔. 전 미팅 가서 낭표 그러다 단다디 계시 배매 바원 요로 전부 쏘고도 하게. I'm just informing Geshe what's happening in the neighborhood here. Let me access what Geshe Kunjo must have sent me here. Okay, so announcements. Geshe Phuntsok is out of town still. So he said, please announce that this Monday and Wednesday the classes are cancelled because he's not here, town. So hopefully those are listening on the thing. So hope you get that. And then I think Tuesday is the Chok Day, the Sakadava Chok Days. Just a reminder. And then, as you know, but I just informed in Garden Grove, right, that aerospace facility had a chemical leakage. And they're struggling to do that. 50,000 people, as I know, had to move out. And the news says that there are only two ways. If the good thing happens, maybe the chemical will leak out into the parking lot. There were tons of chemicals. The worst thing, it might blow up the whole thing. And that's even more scary because there are two other tanks next to it, right? The whole atmosphere. So, yeah, third option, right? So we would like to do like a heart sutra mantra, hopefully to avoid any obstacles there. Okay, and then remaining dedication prayers. Masam jeme shera pare je maje manga namge ngowo soso randi yise chuje wa tusum jebe yumla cha ze hello tayatha gade gade para sangade bodhi so. Dam gade para sangade bodhi so wa chiran doba ju me shi shiva ju ra de shiva ju ji gere tongda ju ju shiva da me de lebe kendan de ba teba ru je me zon so jo ne da shi den ya den de le sho lo de ja ze yu dong be ga de ge sam pong we chu do mian ba xin dan ba jin la wang do ji chu tang nian chu wen jo la so wa de page 5 Mawandame Gunjan Donga Den Kangri Jongso Nyenda Seja Jamgun Yawa Nyewa Yapse Jen Dangson Dizi Mawe Shiva Tenzin Jebe Yingguan Jebe Jen Sheje Nigun Changju Dendu Longdo Tamje Bebe Beyun Jen Duza Yazu Gundo Shabden Tesan Gondang Chezu Zombe Yongzo Yure Tube Nyabin Longri Dejen Nube Beden Ba Tubden Kangri Tabo Shabden Dona Gongmen Zaba Namda Gun Dendang Rove Pende Jungwe Jundu Jumi Chebe Chinle Je Gesan Duje Dendo Shabden Chizu Lame Tukje Melamda Gesan Duje Dendam Sanwe Chozon Todo Chido Domba Ye Chida Membe Dungu Lundu Sho Pechnai Ramjan Shinge Gombo Zaba Men Zodo Namje Jeyun Roma Sho Chozo Cheye Lazo Tamje Taude Mishi Shoge Mudu Zo Tubden Chedang Losan Jawa Shiru Denban Zembe Beyunje Taude Dija Yungwe Shinye Yangdu Ninje Ombo Sowa De Jiden Sumge Chana Beme Denbe Zawa Soso Taba Ye Namda Sudi Yangda Lampa Losan Genden Bedo Shabden Sho Tujong Gyaltsen Nunze Yangbe Samjo Namje Sangzin Jombe Kumjong Shila Songjo Debu Tembe Ngada Chenbo Shabden Sho Chebe Dongwa Kowa Bozo Zunbe Rilan Sivu Bumda Zunbe Tunden Leshe Kiro Shenye Chenbo Shabden Sho Kebe Langdo Hushe Zeda Zunbe Chara Nyezo Rangsa Sangbe Dije Rigon Yishen Yu Sumden Shenye Chenbo Shabden Tezang Lula Jube Dende Menjong Dajue Zangme Sijin Labjin Zidin Dende Beshawa Zenden Shenye Chenbo Shabden Chozong Yawa Seje Chinla Da Tuden Damjin Sumbe Sot Taja Lasan Dabe Denbe Do Jida Membe Dungun Lun Chu Sho Changju Simjo Rinpo Je Maje Panan Yeju Je Yewa Kone Gondo Pewa Sho Tongni Dawa Rinpo Je Maje Panan Yeju Je Yewa Nyamba Mewa Kone Gondo Pewa Sho Sa Shi Bejin Jushi Medo Rira Lingshi Ninde Genpa Sanje Shendo Mede Viva Dogen Nanda Shingla Jeba Sho Kanri Rabe Korbe Shingam So Pendan Tewa Mali Jung Jere Zewan Tenzin Dorjee Shabe Sitien Bado Denjo Je Yidang Guru Rana Mandela Niyandaya Me Yaba Kundo Yanda Lamanda Deme Chuje Bela Lonje Sada Lamje Yunde Rabzo Ne Doje Change Go Yordo Show